Okay. But I'm not. Ok. Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a empezar con esta nueva conferencia del ciclo de Aula Mediterránea del Instituto Europeo del Mediterráneo, en cooperación en esta ocasión con el Máster en Estudios Internacionales, Cooperación y Organizaciones Internacionales de la Universidad de Barcelona. Entonces, para esta conferencia de hoy, agradecemos que haya aceptado la invitación a la profesora Rym Ayadi. Ella es fundadora y presidenta del Economists Association. Además, es especialista en modelos socioeconómicos inclusivos y en finanzas sostenibles. La profesora del Cass Business School y en la City University of London. Y nos va a hablar hoy desde la perspectiva, ¿no?, de la integración económica y cooperación en el Mediterráneo. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'm very pleased to be with you in this program. Thank you, Laura and Elisabetta, for inviting me. I know that the day is almost over here, so I hope that everything is fine with all of your health, because I think this is quite an impressive period that we are living with the pandemic. So I have prepared a few slides, which I will share my screen with you. And here you go. So my speech today will be covering a few topics based on research that we have done over the last few years. In fact, we have started all this thinking of the Euro-Mediterranean partnership and integration since 2009, when I was still in Brussels. And there we tried really to think about the Euro-Mediterranean partnership as a co-development model, which is anchored into the complementarities between the economies of the Euro-Mediterranean region, and really think in a more symmetric way from the north, the south, and also the east. And then we have, in fact, 2009, when we started that big program called the Mediterranean Prospect 2030, we tried to give this new approach of partnership, which is, as I said, anchored on inclusion and sustainability. So that was in 2009. 2010, we lived the Arab uprisings, starting in Tunisia, and then was, enlarged in other countries in the region. And then obviously we moved into a new dynamic back then, which we call it the red transition. So this is so since then we tried to enhance our thinking based on what did not go well over the period. And then we developed a new thinking about what is really development. Okay, inclusion and sustainability are both pillars and core pillars in the construction of development, but we need more. We need more transparency, which is the anchor pillar for accountability and also trust, and responsibility, because you see, every actor in the economy has to be responsible. And obviously we added what I call the TRIS model for development that goes beyond the inclusion and sustainability. Without transparency and responsibility in economic and socioeconomic models, it's very difficult to assess whether there is inclusion and sustainability. And obviously what we try to do over the years is to design some policy recipes, we call it the policy roadmap, for the Euro-Mediterranean partnership, but then also this can be applicable beyond the Euro-Mediterranean partnership. I was asked by you, Laura and Elisabetta, to talk about Euro-Mediterranean, but currently in our research, we are working on Euro-Mediterranean and Africa. So the outline of my speech is the blue transition scenario in the Mediterranean and how we developed it over the years, and I want to explicit it with you. The second point is to share with you the TRIS model for development, and also we developed based on the pandemic that we lived for the past year, what we call resilience. So we want to have now a TRIS model for development that is on the top resilience. And this I will share with you the key elements for it. We'll share with you also some quantifications we made on the region of this blue transition scenario based on what I have said. And then if I have still the time, I will do a zoom on digital transition and regional integration, which is also, we will share with you some data about the status of regional integration in the Euro-Mediterranean over those years. And before I move on into my speech, I want to acknowledge all the research that has been done by the Euro-Mediterranean Network for Economic Studies. And since we have a lot of students in masters sharing this seminar, I would encourage you to visit the website, because if you are interested into research, everything it's public on different areas of labor market, regional integration, macroeconomic policies, role of institutions, role of the private sector, and also role of education. So you have all the publications and also the data. Some of the data can be easily accessible to the students who are interested to do further research. And then the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association is currently coordinating this Euro-Mediterranean Network for Economic Studies, which is a network, of course, of research institutions from both sides of the Mediterranean. So I encourage you to visit both websites, to share, to consult the research we are doing, because we are doing more now on the Euro-Mediterranean and Africa. Now the whole idea is to try to think of research on evidence-based research, also on how to embed it into policy, and the whole thinking of the research that has been done, and also what we are trying to develop is to develop and to provide a new thinking for this Euro-Mediterranean partnership toward more inclusive and more sustainable transition. And then this will provide a different vision, I would say, a different vision for socioeconomic development that is in reality benefiting all segments of the society. And then at the same time, taking into consideration the societal challenges that we're living today, mainly the digital transition, the green transition. I mean, when I say the green transition is the environmental really transition also, and now we are moving into almost a health transition with the pandemic, because we have seen in those countries and some countries in Africa that they were not prepared to face such a major pandemic, and nowadays you need to rethink again the health policy and what health is for socioeconomic development, because if it's not there anchored, then there is a problem. So again, the research will continue, and we are opening further thinking on that, on these dimensions. Now, the regional policies, EU-Mediterranean partnership. So this is what we call the blue transition scenario. So the blue transition scenario is really anchored, as I mentioned at the beginning, on the co-development and also the co-development of different or several regional areas surrounding the Mediterranean. So this is not about a top-down approach, which is EU-made or no, it's really a regional approach where different groups they can co-develop because of specific complementarities in their socio-economic models. And this can be between EU and North and South cooperation schemes or Southeast and so on. And then again, as I said to you, currently we're working on the African dimension. But the most important here is to go toward common sustainability and inclusion while being responsible and transparent. And this is what the TRIS model will bring to this blue prospect for transition. So our main intention here, at least based on what I am discussing with you today, it's how to move into this type of model which allows a more balanced, more symmetric, more transparent, responsible, sustainable and inclusive development, which in reality, if you look at it, we didn't reach it in the region at all. There has been several years of partnership or attempt to enhance the partnership, convergence and integration. But in reality, the results were not as expected, and the level of integration of the Euromed has been quite abysmal, although a lot of political efforts have been put in place. And the Arab Spring or the Arab uprisings in 2010 have moved the whole Mediterranean region into what I call the green transition. Now moving to the green, to the red transition. Okay, so these are what we have developed several years ago to how to really develop this partnership. And back then in 2010, we were thinking that if there would be a strong push by the European Union to move into the green transition, we call it the green prospect. So this is the quadrant on the right hand of my screen here. We would have moved into what I call a sustainable development of an enlarged EU-Med Union. Of course, when we discussed this thinking, this was in the time of the before the Arab uprisings, and then back then the European Union had a great opportunity to move the region into the path of convergence and resilience, as they did for the Eastern the Eastern Bloc. Obviously, this might not have been possible because of obviously all the debates surrounding Turkey back then, which in reality created certain reluctances at EU level to move this construction. With the Arab uprisings, this was even further remote prospects. Now, back then, if we remember the situation of the Mediterranean prior to 2010, actually, what I call the cooperation model and even the partnership model, I would call it, was based on intergovernmentalization of the EU-Med relationships, mainly through bilateral agreements among EU member states and the Med countries around the South and the East Mediterranean. And then obviously European Union followed the same path of cooperation via those bilateral agreement via the European neighborhood policy, which is mainly bilateral. Now you have the Barcelona process, obviously you have the Union for the Mediterranean, which started in 2008 and so on, and try to provide some sort of, regional dimension. But still, these are really countries who are sitting and trying to develop certain partnerships or projects and so on. With the Arab Spring, we moved straight into what I call the Euro-Mediterranean area under threat. This is a red prospect. which started practically bit before, the Arab uprisings with the autocratic regimes in the south, which have been put out by the people. But then again, the political systems have, in a way, that we can, if we look at the situation in the Mediterranean today, if we look at for example, the case of Syria and Libya, still conflict and tensions. Other countries, like, for example, Tunisia, struggling to stabilize its democratic transition with very huge difficulties or economic difficulties. And we can see this clearly in the increasing inequality, in increasing poverty. And this is not the prospects that was expected. Now, other countries like Egypt, for example, moved into a different type of model, which eventually economically can be perceived as, probably, moving into the right direction. But then on the political aspects, this needs to be carefully assessed and see whether there has been an improvement in that sense in terms of implementation of a democratic transition. Now, looking at the Euro-Mediterranean partnership within this dynamic, we'll call it the red dynamic, we can see clearly that the relationship, in a way, have been weakened. I mean, if we look at what are the realizations of this partnership, we can see that the results were below expectations. So the result of convergence and integration were below integration. And in reality, if we look at these two axes as you see them in the screen, we moved into a prospect where the GDP growth potential was much below expected growth potential, which meant also that the region had to create jobs for the youth, for women, and this has not happened. And this is why we saw the ramifications or the consequences of such failure of policies via the migration crisis, which is not even solved up to today. But then most probably with the pandemic, it has been in a way halted because of the severity of the problem and also the restriction of mobility within the world, in a way. Now, moving into the blue transition, and this is what we are trying to hope and to move the region into, that sustainable co-development of the EU Mediterranean sub-region. And this is really built on differential multilateral agreement between EU and Mediterranean Arab regions to enhance cooperation on key topics, on key areas, like, for example, the Green Deal, like, for example, women empowerment, like, for example, private sector development, entrepreneurship, and things like that, or maybe water projects. And really, in my view, this will be a longer term prospect, but at the end, that might yield to more positive results. So this is the blue transition, the way we thought about it. And the whole idea here, when I talk about a multilateral approach, it's what I call the regional communalities, commonwealth or common regions. It's really to think of all of this as sub-regions rather than country by country. So we move from a bilateral, I would call agreements or collaboration or partnership into a regional approach and a multilateral approach, and then also differentiated and could be also very diverse. And then at the end, you can reach a certain other, scenario that could lead to more prosperity and more growth in the region. So this is what we are thinking of when we talk about multilateral approach rather than a bilateral approach. Now, if this will work or not, we need, of course, to continue checking and testing and monitoring all of these aspects. Now, this blue transition vision now, what is adding to the overall thinking of regional integration is to plug into it what we call the TRIS model. Okay, the TRIS model for socioeconomic development, we want it, or at least the idea is to have it dominant in the years 2050, and I think this model would be important because it is going aligned with the transitions that the global economy is living today in terms of digital transitions, green transition, technological transition, and nowadays the health transition that I talked about at the beginning. So the transparency, as I mentioned, it's to really the transparent governance. We need to have much more governance, transparency in the region that will allow to build the trust based on a greater accountability of all the actions, but not only of the government, but of the actors of the economy, and that are really moving into, I would call it a better model for development, or more, I would say, fairer and then transparent and clearer. You know, this is what we are. So what does it mean in practice? I mean, this is obviously, these are all principles for development, but then everything has to be transparent. So then when you go into partnership, you know exactly what is there in the partnership that could be win-win situation, or could lead to win-win situation, or at least you know what are the risks based on that partnerships. But then without transparency, for example, on many aspects, it's very difficult to know what is this part. So in reality, the transparency will reduce the asymmetry of information between the partners, be it countries, be it economic players, being social players. And this will allow to build with time the trust. And of course, this trust is anchored into the social fabric. So then you do not have this breakup in a way of those, you know, the partnerships, or eventually at local level, the social contracts. Second is the responsibility. The level of responsibility means to manage every possible intended or unintended consequences of the future, and also to reflect their ethical acceptability. So, for example, let's take innovation. So innovation sometimes is positive for processes, for production, for products, and so on. But sometimes it has negative spillovers eventually. And this negative spillover could be coming from the unethical acceptability of it. So this is why responsibility is very closely linked also to the ethical acceptability of any action that is made. And I think the responsibility is something that needs to be taught at very early stage, to allow the different generation and future generation to develop further thinking about this. And then, of course, I'm not going to talk about inclusion and sustainability, because these are anchors in the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. Now, I mean, according to us, this model could offer a good response to the prosperity paradox. Of course, this means that we might deal with the problem of the wage stagnation, the youth unemployment, and the inequality. Yeah? So this could be an answer, but we need to, this is an assumption, and we need to think about how to ensure this TRIS model could offer that response to the prosperity paradox. Now, the second is to cope with the acceleration of the new science, technologies, and discoveries. And these are also very important, because we are moving into a transformative economies based on the robotics, the globotics, and all of the, and also how to deal with the pandemic, because in a way now there is a whole movement of degrowth. Why? Because we need to ensure that the growth the economies is producing is clean. And this is also something which we need to think carefully what it means for this region. Now we also, this TRIS model, in my view, could serve to enhance resilience. for external shocks. And this we try to explicit it and explain it in some recent papers, how this model, especially if we take one thing, the transparency. If you have a health system that is transparent, you can collect the data about the prevalence of a pandemic, for example. This is transparency, and then you can transmit this to your citizens in a very simple manner to explain the reality, and then based on that you can manage, for example, the crisis, and from there you can also design the policies for recovery. So this is all, in my view, can be developed within this framework that we are proposing. Now, this is again just a formulation of it, and of course, in all of this, we need to take into account the context. The context, it's about, of course, the globalization, but for the moment, there is a disruption in this concept because of the pandemic. The digitalization, which is accelerating the whole machineries behind, and the automation as well. So we need to think to what extent the automation will have an implication on the future of work and all of this. And then all the other aspects that we discussed about previously. Now, our vision here, when we plug both on the future of the Mediterranean, we need to think of this three dimension now. So promoting the dialogue between different civilizations, because we're talking about subgroups or sub-regions, and every region has its own culture, its own local context, and it needs to be very well understood. And then, of course, instead of getting and shocking, in the case, for example, of the red transition, this is what is happening. No, but then we move into a blue transition, which is really trying to promote diversity and trying to move into prosperity paradigm, which is not there yet. And the second is to adhere to a common project, which is this multi-dimensional, flexible, differentiated regional integration project, which is based on win-win. But then you can only base it on a win-win if you know what's this about. Means the transparency is a core. And then, of course, building these regional strategies and shared action plans based on this risk development. So this is what the vision we were proposing, and we try to test. So we have a lot of papers that share this thinking. Now, as I said to you, since we're talking about a vision, we're talking about future, a horizon, and the horizon now that we're talking about is 2050. Before, in 2009, we were talking about 2030. But of course, that rendezvous, I call it, was absolutely missed in 2010. And we moved, as I explained to you, into a pure red transition. So we just moved down with a huge destruction of value. And then also, not only destruction of value straight away, but then you see it's the value, the expected value could have been much higher in different circumstances, in different scenarios. So it's what I call the opportunity cost. Now, the blue transition vision, which is underpinned in this TRIS model for development, will take into account what I call these four transitions. Okay, so these four transitions are very important because we are moving into from what I call a conservative future. So let's assume we have three futures. One is a conservative, so it's a business as usual scenario. We move from what we were yesterday to 2050, or a transformative future, and what I call the H2, which is the horizon in between. It's the movement from future 1 to future 3. And what we want to achieve is to go into a transformative future, which, for example, if we take the four transitions, the green transition is from extractive, acquisitive resources economy to more circular, that use energy and natural resources and to revalue the nature capacity, for example, to combat climate change. This is what we want to change our thinking even about the economy, instead of, for example, thinking, okay, we extract the natural resources like oil, and this is also linked to a lot of fragility because the model is very fragile. Now we move into a green circular way of thinking where technology is embedded in the construction, and then also we look at the nature in a slightly different way. For example, we can look at the nature by its capacity to sequestrate, for example, carbon dioxide to combat climate change. And this is a complete different view. It means that you will revalue your economic model based on moving or accelerating to a green transition. The second one is capitalism. I mean, we have lived in a model of excessive capitalism built on shareholder value. Shareholder value, yes, it worked in the post-Washington consensus. It worked perfectly well. Problem is, it created huge disparities, huge inequalities. And those disparities and inequalities were not fit or were not filled in by the tax policies, for example. So we need to move into what I call distributed, inclusive capitalism. What is this? At least it serves the society. But then how it is, that's the question. I mean, I remember a few years ago, I moved 5 years to Canada to stay to Montreal. I set up an institute on cooperatives to better understand this cooperative model, as a model that could be a third pillar. So we have 3 pillars. We have the private, the public, and then I thought back then the cooperative model could be the third pillar. Yes, it's possible, but we need to better understand the governance aspect under that model. So really moving into this distributed inclusive capitalism, I think this is the challenge of our societies today, and we need to work on it and continue work on it. And I think there are many attempt now to move into this new thinking of capitalism, and I think there is a great opportunities of research there. Now the societal transition is okay. We lived and we are still probably less than before. Moving to an addiction and an induced consumption model. So produce, overproduce, and overconsume. We need to move into more responsible forms of consumptions, productions, and lifestyles, centered into well-being, and not only well-being, centered into health and well-being. And this is important as well, because we've seen that the importance of health, and we've seen it in our in this situation of the pandemic. And then finally, the governance transition. We need to move from this top-down approach to more bottom-up approach, based on horizontal, democratic, cooperative, built on transparency and accountability. And this is what we need to move into this. And then, of course, we are trying to develop those pathways and policy agendas in that horizon. So these are all wishful thinking, as I said. So it's, I mean, that's where we want to go, but the reality is different. I mean, it's very difficult to move into those directions. So this is just the formulation of what I was talking about. From H1, which is the inertia scenario, that we can continue moving into this inertia scenario, but then this will take all of this region and also the partnership into the wall. But that's why we need to move into these transformative scenarios with the different partners of the region, mainly the European Union and maybe others who have the same interest in that respect. And this is maybe we could move into a better outcome in the future. So what I'm saying here is to complement the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals here, as you see them, based on what I call the 4 aspects, which is the transparent governance, responsible living, inclusive economy, and sustainable energy and environment. And then what I have explained, this is what the future we want, which is includes interlinkages with the Sustainable Development Goals, of the UN, and only it gives the movement from what I call the H1, which is, you know, the horizon that we have today, if we can move in it, but then we need to go into transformative model, which will allow us to build better models of development, but also better models of partnership, because this is core. So this is the interaction between, as I said, the model of integration, what's the blue transition itself, the TRIS model, that's the model, the heart of the model, which I go back to the center. This is the center that we are talking about. And then now I want to share with you the concept of resilience. Okay, so the concept of resilience really for me has been developed last year during the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic has tested global resilience. I mean, all resilience. I mean, at local level, at national level, at regional level, and so on. And for me, the whole idea is to ensure that we have a model, which we call it the RIS at the end, the responsible, call it the responsible innovation strategy. But then if we focus on the resilience, it's, for me, we move into the capacity of the economies to resist and rebound. And this is a key element which we need to develop over the years. So, and as you see here, the concept of resilience, as I said, is the capacity of a system to recover from adversity and from the temporary or prolonged shocks, and then try to move into a better system, which is bounce back, more strong, and that has already absorbed the change, okay, and then to adapt to the change and to transform itself. So it's really the capacity of the system to absorb the problem, to transform it, and then to move forward with it. So in reality, to absorb the shock. And this is, for me, the capacity, what I call resilience of an economy. An economy that is there, the shock comes, it absorbs, and then it transforms the shock based on the internal capacities to move forward. And then how to do this? I mean, how to do this? How to do this is, for me, prevention, understanding what the risks you have, and preparing for the optimal policy responses. This is what I call the early warning system. So you have a stress condition, and then you move into the TRIS transition at the end. And then second is to manage the crisis, manage the risk, and then to recover. And this is exactly what we're doing, for example, in many countries in COVID. The countries that have been better prepared, their health systems, their health infrastructure is better prepared to absorb the shock, they were stronger to manage the shock. And then obviously later on, they were stronger to recover from the shock. Of course, partnership in all of this is key, because it's not the same when you are in, for example, in the case of the European Union, you had European Union that provided several schemes, regional solidarity, help for all the countries to move from the shock together, right? And the crisis management has been, in a way, better coordinated if we compare to other countries from the South. But this is not the case of the South and East Mediterranean. Now I'm going to skip this digital transition. I want, since my talk, and I see the time, so I think I have 5 minutes to finalize, because they gave me, I remember, 45 minutes. I mean, where we are today, I mean, where are we in terms of the regional integration in the region? In the region means the Mediterranean. I mean, first of all, we need to understand what we are testing. Here we have proposed our own matrix of regional integration, which has these 7 dimensions. Normally, the reference model generally is trade and FDI, okay? Generally, when you assess regional integration, you look at trade and FDI. Many other regions that have assessed regional integration, they looked at different elements. And in our proposal, we looked at different elements, 7 elements. One is trade, finance, governance. Governance is essentially key, because if you want to integrate, you need to have at least more or less similar or convergent levels of governance. I mean, when I say governance, really the voice accountability, political stability, government effectiveness, and all these World Bank indicators of, I mean, this World Bank indicator can be enhanced, certainly, but I think it's a good starting point. And then infrastructure, labor mobility, very important, and then higher research and education, because if you are integrated, means you can move, you know, research and innovation, and research and education and innovation can move, circulate in the space, in the regional space. In Europe it does, and that's a regional integration model, in my view, that worked pretty well since the inception, since the setup of the European Union. But then in the South Mediterranean, Euromed cooperation, that's not working at all. We have this document which you can consult, but then if you look at what we have done here, you can see that if we look at the trade, there has been, I mean, it's very easy to read this composite indicator for the trade dimension, just to give you an idea simply. Yeah? So we created a kind of a 100% benchmark. So that's a convergence, the max we can get based on this countries that we have assessed here. And we have mainly we have assessed Europe and the Mediterranean region. And then the West Balkans too. So these are all countries altogether. And you can see clearly that there has been some advances for sure. But then overall, there is still some room for it. I mean, look, if you look at the purple line, the Balkans have increased quite a lot. But then if you look at region, Turkey, for example, alone, it has some, you know, leveled off a bit. And then, for example, the East Med also leveled off a bit, but these are data up to 2015. Now we have already the data for 2019, and the situation in a way has been worsening. On the governance dimension, still there is huge room for convergence. And for me, governance and institutions are key to advance the integration. And this is not happening yet in the South Mediterranean. So you can see, for example, the Maghreb region, where is the line? The yellow line is under 50%. So there is all this, you know, distance to go up to really reach the level of convergence at 100%, which is, you know, a kind of an average of the Europe and all this region together. If you look, for example, at the other countries, like for example, I said the Maghreb, so also the East Med is also quite low. Infrastructure dimension too. I mean, there is a need to have some infrastructure which is minimalistically convergent to the overall group. And then again, as you can see it here, there is a lot. There is room to go further integration in that in that dimension. This is the FDI, but again, the FDI, we took the FDI's cumulative GDP. But again, there is still room for further. So, but then if we look at other indicators, it is clear that, for example, look at the mobility of PhD students. It's one indicator that is taken for dimension 7, which is higher education research. You know, the Maghreb is very low. I mean, Western Balkan, okay, it's also going down low. Eastern Mediterranean, yes, high. But then these are the numbers, but look at the numbers on the right side. I mean, on the y-axis, it's very, very low. I mean, we are talking about abysmal, really, information. And this is data that we collected by hand. Now, where are we going for the Mediterranean? I think we cannot lose hope. I think there is a lot of potential, for example, for developing global value chains, regional value chains, which could be a good vehicle for disseminating technology, research and development, and so on. There is still some role for example, certain sectors where they could integrate, you know, sectoral integration. Certainly, there is still potential to increase the connectivity and interactions between small and medium-sized enterprises. And then there is need to do more work on the labor market, especially to fit, what is needed from both sides, from the Mediterranean. But this is also a dimension of migration, legal migration and more labor migration, which needs to be carefully looked at. So I don't know, I'm looking at the time. Do I still have 3 minutes to go through this, or no?
Yes, I think you can go through it.
Yes, because these are, for me, just to wrap it up, because again, I talked about principles, but then now what we have done is to quantify all of this. And then to quantify what we call the blue transition scenario based on some assumptions that we set up based on the research we have. For example, going into more accelerating the green transition, diversifying the productions, becoming much less dependent on the hydrocarbon, increasing trade integration. Okay, we cannot say further because we are using a model which is also a little bit missing certain elements. But the key point is just to give you an idea where we go if eventually all those elements are taken into consideration. And this is what you see. I mean, obviously, the GDP would increase. If we do the estimations up to 2050, the CO2 emission is leveled off, and then you can see that the final energy demand was also around that numbers. Our idea is also to have to move into more renewable energy and electricity via hydrogen and all of green electricity generation, and this is all you cannot do it without policy intervention. So what we have provided, for example, is over the research we have done over the years, and we are still doing it. It's not over. I mean, we are still looking at different aspects and so on, how to shift from what I call the current challenges, which is what I call the inertia scenario for different elements, institution, science, technology, innovation, labor and finance, trade and FDI and MSMEs, to move into a shift toward this TRIS model for blue transition, which is the transformative scenario. And we provided certain policy recommendations to take into account by the countries who want to move into this transformative blue transition approach. Obviously, I must say that you need to have institutions who drive the integration to drive this partnership. And I believe that still the European Union and other players could take an important role. But this is probably what we hope. I think I would stop here, and if you have questions, please, I'm available.
Thank you very much. I think that there were some questions already. There was a comment on your mention of cooperativism. So Roderick said that cooperativism and more widely SSE are not a third pillar really. They are part of the private sector, which is not only the capitalist one. It was a reflection on your comment on cooperativism as a possible answer.
Yes, I agree with this, but then again, cooperativism is it depends. First of all, the movement of cooperative is very diverse. It's not the same everywhere. I mean, now if you look at the applications of the cooperative model, yes, absolutely, it's private sector. I mean, they are using exactly the same model of shareholder value, but the thing is, I don't know how they do it, because you see, you have other elements which are efficiency and then governance, and then I mentioned transparency. So if you use just a normal model, which is the conventional, I mean, I say the conventional that we have accepted as conventional model, then it is based on shareholder value. You have shareholders and you have certain management, and I'm speaking about, you know, on the organizational side, okay, of the economic players. But then if you look at how cooperatives are functioning, it's pretty much the same. I mean, the only thing is they have members, and then those members are too wide. But then you still have the management, and you still have the same shareholder. You know, they don't have shareholders. It's normally members' value, but some of the cooperatives, they created some sort of understanding of what is the member value. I mean, you can debate that. But also you have the issues related to what I call the governance of the cooperatives. This is now you have maybe Rodriguez mentioned probably the social pillar, or maybe the non-for-profit pillar. I mean, you have cooperatives spread in both in reality. Yeah? So, but it depends. So this is why a law on cooperative is very important. There is a European law, but then it wasn't used. So this is also something which, in my view, needs to be further researched.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. There is, yeah, they don't pay. Well, yeah, Roderick continued saying, well, that they don't pay shareholders. Cooperatives don't pay shareholders, and they don't pay dividends. So that's a difference. Yeah, I wanted to, I don't know if there are other questions in the room, but something just to, while we receive more questions or comments, I wanted to comment on your reference to accountability and transparency and accountability, because and the changes that are necessary in government, okay, from this top-down government to through a more horizontal kind of policies or models of organizing, and I think that there, because as you said, all this quite wishful thinking or a future that we should arrive one day. No, it's like the model, the ideal model towards we should go. But I think in this aspect, we are advancing, even if there is resistance. But it is something that we already see that we are going towards situation where governments are being more accountable and are being more controlled by the population, even because of the social media and technology, and the fact that we have our access to information is easier. And even though there is also the problem of the use of social media and of the information to mislead and fake news and so on, but it is true that we are living changes in this area of accountability and control from of population above towards government. Sorry. So there, I think that we can. It's very obvious that there are things that are being changed slowly, because changes are always slow. But I think that this is a path that has already begun, and we will see changes in the future. And it is very important, as you said. I completely agree. I agree with the whole vision, and by the way, and I enjoyed very much the talk, because it was very clear, and you gave us a lot of ideas and things to think about. But concerning specifically this part of the model, I think that there it is obvious that we are seeing changes. We are also seeing changes in green economy and circular economy. It's true that there are projects and there are realizations there, but so there is a path that has begun in all the different items that you have pointed out. But is there the institutional will? That's what I'm not so sure about. Or what we lack to see, more really institutional will towards these ends. Not even from the EU, and not to say about other institutions. So what do you think about that? Do you think that there is an opportunity, there is a window for that? There was a window in the Sustainable Development Goals that it seemed that there was a new way of acting there, but first the international economic crisis in 2008, 2010, and then and now with the pandemic, I don't know.
I think in my view, there is always an opportunity because, for example, nowadays we are, for me, the pandemic itself has its own opportunities. What are the opportunities? For example, enhancing solidarity. Okay, and this is important. So solidarity could be a mean for further partnership, but not necessarily done in such a way where it's, call it, yeah, from political point of view, maybe diplomacy. Maybe that's also possible because it depends. But then, for example, if we look at the vaccine debate, okay, specifically, it's a good opportunity to support, to be supporting the countries who have no access to vaccine. For example, I mean, supposing that these vaccines are effectively assessed and looked at carefully as well. I mean, that's also important. Transparency in that aspect is very important. But let's assume the process is all clear and it's appropriate. Then this could be used in a certain manner, for example. I mean, but then just using the objective of giving access to health to all, make it universal health at a global level, not simply because some countries have a surplus and some others have a shortage, and then you use it to, it's the how you do it. And I think these are the principles that have to be agreed upon. I think you're talking about political leadership willingness or whoever. Yes, but then the problem is it depends on the context, which context we are in. I mean, in the Arab uprising, there was a great opportunity to move the partnership in a certain direction, but it was not done. I mean, we continued into the same fragmentation, and actually the region got even further fragmented, and no action was taken, from any side. But then, are you expecting actions to be taken? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not what you are expecting. Who is going to take those actions? I don't know. Maybe the European Union, because it has the role of EU as a global actor, but then they want to get certain actions in certain regions because of economic ties, social ties, research and development, and whatever have you. Yes, it's possible, but what could be the end game? Or should there be an end game? I mean, the whole idea of what we propose, that's why it's a differentiated approach based on a win-win situation. It's actually, I call it a very pragmatic approach. But then at least it's based on evidence, transparency, accountability, because every action you do, you need to be accountable to your own citizens. But then at the same time, I think the principles of inclusion and sustainability are key. I mean, we cannot move without them nowadays. I mean, we need to accelerate them. I mean, we need to accelerate the transition toward the green economy. We need to do many things. Also, the digital economy. If we don't move, I mean, the digital, it's already moving. You know, technology is already moving very fast. So those countries, if they don't adapt, they will be completely, you know, far behind. I mean, we are moving already in Europe into clean energy using hydrogen type of technologies. I mean, very soon countries that are exporting oil, they might not find, you know, the demand they need because this is polluting sources of energy. So you see, we're moving. I mean, this is why for me it's a matter of you look at the transitions, you look at the challenges, and then you try to find the appropriate recipe and to move fast. And of course, the countries need to have leadership to move, but is it happening? I don't know. I mean, we need to continue monitoring.
Okay. I don't know if there is, I had another question because you mentioned that you're also working on not only Euro-Mediterranean, but also Africa. So what is, but you didn't mention it so much in the presentation because it was beyond what we asked you for today, but can you mention a little bit what are the prospects then? It's the same model that are you imagining?
It's exactly the same model because those principles have to apply to this model, but then obviously Africa, it's not you know, a homogeneous group, it's a very heterogeneous. The potential is huge, and then the challenges are pretty much the same. There is a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities, and then obviously nowadays Europe is changing also its partnership models with Africa. But then how can you match those regions? It belongs to the whole concept, because our approach is based on the centrality of the Mediterranean. So Mediterranean, it's in between Africa and Europe. So then it's a matching point, geographic matching point. And this can be an opportunity to build on. Now, obviously, there are several ties between Europe and the Mediterranean. It's already there, but then, of course, you know, the integration did not happen as expected. The geographical proximity is also a very important factor. And then Africa now, it's the continent that has the largest growth and probably potential. I mean, and then there are several complementarities. So that's what we are trying to look at and see, for example, how to move, for example, from the aid policy, the aid thinking, into really co-development rather than just moving into the same. So there are many ways to develop it, just taking the development policy. I mean, I think nowadays we need to move beyond aid, and this is something which have been discussed since many years ago. So this is the areas where but then also in terms of the digital, in terms of the financial inclusion, in terms of what can we learn from, you know, different experiences and all of this.
Okay, I don't know if there are any questions. Let's see. No. Well, I have another question then. How do you assess the intervention or the influence of China, especially in the region, which is also a third factor, and they are taking a very important role, I presume. And how this intervention affects to the possibility of this regional integration or development?
I think it's not only China. I mean, China is active, Russia is becoming active, India has been active, US is active. I mean, there are many players who are active, but then obviously every player has its own objective, okay? But then all those players are far. I mean, it's not the, you see, the Europe is closer. And I think this is also in terms of history, ties, and also geography and so on. China is becoming a global actor, and I think obviously it's important to enhance on China, but then on a global level, you know, the requirements for more transparency on what they do, what they invest in, what are the loans they provide, and all of this. And this is a global debate at G20 level also. And in my view, China could be also a player that would contribute to certain development, but then it needs to be monitored and it needs to be discussed. I mean, these are all countries which have very close ties with China. I mean, if you look at the vaccine, just the last thing that we are seeing today, I mean. Russia and China have been providing vaccines to those countries. Now, is it how do you assess this? I mean, we'll see. I mean, these are the different players. They are playing in having the partnerships with those countries, and this is not something new. The only thing is very difficult to collect the data on what exactly. I mean, China, for example, and India is doing in Africa, but we did a paper many years ago in 2004, and they are quite active, especially in the extraction of mineral resources. I mean, these are all things that need to be carefully looked at and assessed.
Okay, so, well, it's already 7:40. Okay. We don't have more questions. I don't want to abuse. I think it was a very, very interesting speech, very inspiring, and really personally gave me a lot to think about and ideas to follow up. So thank you very much, Rym, for accepting our invitation and being here with us this afternoon in this not so nice situation. I hope we can meet personally one day when we leave COVID behind.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your time, and I hope it was useful.
It was, I'm sure it was. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias al público por asistir y acompañarnos en esta tarde. Muchas gracias. Damos por finalizada la sesión. Gracias.